Hey folks, welcome back to my Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is my slightly belated October wrap-up. So, because due to choir rehearsal stuff and my final research essay for the semester, I was supposed to do this probably last weekend and then this weekend just gone and it kind of didn't happen, so it's happening now. Yes, so I do apologise for the delay, but I have a wrap-up. I read 9 things in October. Not everything I intended to read because I was of course doing the OcTBR challenge, but there are 2 novels that I did not get to, and there's 3 novels I didn't get to, and 1 that I started but didn't get far any. But I did actually read the other, I think it was 6 things that were on my TBR and a few extra things. So, which, you know, I am a mood reader, so, and there was a readathon, which meant I needed options. Anyway, so here is what I read in October. I started the month really well with Before She Ignites by Jodi Meadows. This is the first in her Fallen Isles trilogy, and I did check after I finished it, and the other 2 books are out, so when I get the chance I can actually finish the series, which I really want to do because I really enjoyed this book. I've read Jodi Meadows before, but only as part of the trio of Lady Janies who wrote My Lady Jane. But she's an excellent YA writer. It's a fantasy with the protagonist is a person of colour, as you can see on the cover. And she also has anxiety and slight obsessive compulsive counting issues. So a diverse book, which is really great. And I found it quite intriguing. So it's a world in where there are dragons, where our girl she was born when a peace treaty between the various island kingdoms was signed, and so the treaty is named after her. And so she's like this almost quasi-religious political figure, but really has no idea what's actually going on around her. And then she discovers something about her council, which is not good. And when she accuses them, they send her to prison. And so it's her experiences going from privilege to a prison and trying to figure out what the hell is going on and how she's going to get out and what allies she's going to make. And it was really good. So I was reading this the weekend I was at the Conflux convention. And I found myself on the Sunday afternoon, sitting in a cafe reading. And I was like, you know, I'm going to a banquet tonight. I need to be there at 6:30, so I guess I'll leave about 6. And then I get to 6 o'clock and there's only a couple of chapters left. And I'm like, 6:15, that's fine. I get to 6:15, there are about 10 pages left. Everything's on fire. Everything's collapsing. And I'm like, do I go to the banquet now or do I finish the book? I totally finished the book and I still made the banquet on time. But yeah, so it was a really exciting end and I really enjoyed it. So I am actually really looking forward to picking up the other 2 books. So that will be very exciting. So that is Before She Ignites by Jodi Meadows. Good start to the month. Then that was the longest book that I had on my TBR. So then I went to the shortest book and picked up Taste of Marrow by Sarah Gailey. This is the second of her novellas from the Tor.com range about an alternate history of the US where they attempted to breed hippos as a meat source and some escaped and went feral in the various waterways of southern United States. I kind of wish I'd reread the first one, A River of Teeth, first, because I couldn't, because this actually pretty much follows on from what happened, the relationships that happened in the first one, and I couldn't actually remember what happened, so I was slightly confused. However, it's still really good. I will probably maybe next year, I will try and reread them both together. There's a diverse cast of characters. And what I really liked about this book was its depiction of a breastfeeding mother. So one of the characters had a baby. I think, if I remember correctly, at the end of the last book. maybe. And you see, while I have never had children, I was raised by a mother who was a devoted member and counsellor of the Australian Breastfeeding Association. So over my life, I've heard a lot about breastfeeding and issues around breastfeeding. So this actually depicted a mother, particularly, it was an adventure to get back a kidnapped baby, basically. And there was definite issues with the mother in terms of having too much supply, if you know what I mean, and having an infection in her breasts. And some of the remedies that were recommended were what I recognised from my mother's discussions on the topic. So I thought it was actually quite, as far as I could tell, quite an accurate representation of a breastfeeding mother. Which I always really love to see something like that turn up in fiction. So, yeah, I thoroughly recommend both The River of Teeth and Taste of Marrow by Sarah Gailey. So then we are coming on to a few of the things that I read that weren't on the TBR, but read as part of Dewey's Readathon, and that is volumes 9 and 10 of Ms. Marvel by G. Willow Wilson. So these are the last two G. Willow Wilson penned volumes of Ms. Marvel. I'd kind of been holding off on them unconsciously because I've absolutely loved the character that G. Willow Wilson has created. The character will be continuing. I believe there is already stuff out with a new writer, but I did love G. Willow Wilson's writing so much. She writes a teenage superhero so well by not just focusing on the superhero, but focusing on the teenager and the things that teenagers go through, just with added on superhero shenanigans. So volumes 9 and 10 were really enjoyable. I really liked them, and they were very much about friendship and, you know, being there for each other and supporting each other. And yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed these two volumes of Ms. Marvel. Alright, then we have another book from my TBR, and that was Wild Beauty by Anna-Marie McLemore. I believe she identifies as Latinx, so it will count as one of my authors of colour. So it's sort of a fantasy / magical realism. I'm not quite sure where the line is drawn. But it's essentially about a family of women who live on this estate and have this magic which allows them to grow flowers. But they cannot leave the estate, not permanently. There are always 5 of them in each generation, and the men they love disappear. It's a curse that, you know. So this is about the new generation of women, and they end up in a very interesting situation and find out some very interesting things about the actual truth behind their family curse. So it was kind of fascinating. Most of the characters, most of the girls actually seem to be probably bisexual, at least. There is certainly attraction to women and love towards women as well as men. So it probably also counts as an LGBTQI+ book for me. I came out of it kind of thinking, I know this is good, but I don't know whether I just wasn't in the right mood for it because I read it as part of a readathon. I kind of feel like I needed to read it again in order to fully understand it. So I don't think I'll be able to give a true opinion about this book until I do reread it. So it will be going on my reread pile. But that is Wild Beauty by Anna-Marie McLemore. Then the second novel I read during the Dewey's 24-hour readathon and part of my OCTBR challenge was Blue Lightning by Anne Cleeves. Now this is the 4th Shetland book. I think it's the 4th Shetland book, which I have been reading because I like the TV show Shetland. So it's crime, set on the Shetland Islands in Scotland, with D.I. Jimmy Perez. And I got through most of it really enjoying it, like I have the previous books. And then the end happened. And I got very angry because there was a character who was fridged. She didn't need to die. She really didn't. They'd already discovered who the murderer was. And she died in order to encourage the character development of our male protagonist. So she was actually fridged in the proper term of the word fridged. I really wasn't happy. And then I started thinking about the rest of the book. There are some really unfortunate tropes. There's a dead gay. So the dead gay trope, the dead lesbian trope. Also, the other murder victim, sexually predatory. Not great. So, and there's a really horrendous conversation with the main character's father, who had an affair with the first victim and then tried to blame her for the affair. So yeah, I'm really not happy with this book. I'm very disappointed because I've been enjoying this series and now I'm starting to wonder were there tropes I was ignoring in the previous books and just didn't notice. So I'm probably going to continue the series, but I'm probably going to do it via the library rather than buying my own copies. And I'm going to be very wary about the next one that I read and be on the lookout for any problematic tropes. So that's Blue Lightning by Anne Cleeves, unfortunately. The other thing I did for the readathon was start an audiobook, which I got halfway through during the readathon and then finished like the next day. And that was rereading Catching Crow by Ambelin, Kwaymullina and Ezekiel Kwaymullina. So you heard me wax lyrical about this last year. It's a YA book by a pair of Indigenous authors. And it is one of those things that kind of skirts magical realism, fantasy, ghost stories. But I almost hesitate to call it speculative fiction because a lot of the speculative elements come from the specific viewpoint regarding death that is, I think, probably judging from the authors, a very Indigenous perspective. And it feels wrong to call it speculative, but there are like dead people talking and hanging about and being ghosts. But it's really good. It's a really good insight into Indigenous culture. It's got a lot to say on institutionalised racism in small country towns in Australia, and the power dynamics of that institutionalised racial racism. It's a really good book. It's some of it's almost it's not poetry, but there's one character who tells her own story and there's an almost poetic feel to the words. It feels kind of like prose poetry. But it's a mystery. There are some things that I would probably trigger warning for. So there is oblique descriptions, oblique discussion of sexual assault. It's not graphic, but it's being told in a way. It actually took me a while in my first reading to figure it out, and then punched me in the gut when I figured out what was happening. The audiobook is read by Miranda Tapsell, who is an Indigenous actress, and she did a really good job of reading the audiobook. So I thoroughly enjoyed rereading Catching Crow by Ambelin and Ezekiel Kwaymullina. The other thing that was on my TBR for TBR and that I read part of through the readathon and then part of through the rest of the month is Uncanny Magazine's Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction Special Edition, which I have a hard copy of because of the Kickstarter. It was a Kickstarter award. But so this is their first of their Disabled People Destroy series. I think they have since done Disabled People Destroy Fantasy, which I haven't got around to yet. But it's essentially a big double issue. It's full of short stories and essays and poetry and interviews. Basically, I don't think they necessarily needed... They weren't strict about the authors having to be I think most of the authors are disabled in some way. They didn't necessarily have to, stories didn't necessarily have to be about disability, but most of them are. They're science fiction. There are a range of stories, a range of disabilities. I really quite enjoyed them. Off the top of my head, I can't think of titles, but there was some, there was stuff about mental illness disability. There was stuff about treatment. There was stuff about living in a world that suits you with the particular disability. Like, so for example, living in space makes things easier for some disabilities, that kind of thing. Yeah, it was a really fascinating read, and I thoroughly recommend Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction from Uncanny. Edited by Elsa Sjunneson-Henry. I've probably pronounced that incorrectly. And Dominik Parisien. So, yeah, that was really awesome. And then the final thing that I read on the last day of October is I bought myself another audiobook with my Audible credit that had come in. And it was a reread for me of Miss Marple's The Moving Finger, which is, I have in this omnibus. That's the only copy that I have, a hard copy. But, yes, The Moving Finger. So I hadn't actually read that in a long time. I watched the TV adaptation recently. But, yeah, I listened to The Moving Finger on audio, which is another Miss Marple. It's a Miss Marple mystery, and basically involves poison pen letters. And then a woman seems to have committed suicide, but everyone's a bit suspicious because she seems to have lost her mind completely due to a poison pen letter. And so I suppose no one really considers the death suspicious apart from the poison pen letters. And then a week later, the maid in the same house gets murdered. And everyone goes, something's going on here. Miss Marple doesn't actually turn up until quite towards the end of the story, but is involved in the final solution, of course. But yeah, it was a fun listen. So I think it was read by Joan Hickson, but I can't remember because I've read a few Miss Marples via audio in the last week. So yeah, it's been one of those sort of weeks. But yes, so that was the last thing that I read in October. So that is my October wrap up. That is how I did in my OCTBR challenge. Didn't achieve everything, but was pretty pleased with what I did achieve, particularly because I had a good start to the month. And then I spent a couple of weeks not reading at all, pretty much. I injured my shoulder and things just went downhill. And then I had the readathon at the end of the month, which got me back into actually reading. So yeah, that is basically my October wrap up, and I will see you all again really soon. Bye.